The old car sat silently in Jean Hackman's driveway, but when the police opened the door, it transformed into a coffin filled with horrifying pieces, not just crumpled papers and old trinkets, but stained notebooks, eerie audio tapes, photos plastered across the backseat. Every face, every secret, every dirty deal Hackman had secretly collected over decades. Did Hollywood think Hackman had retired? No, he was a silent eye watching every crack in the system, and now everything was exposed in that rusty trunk. Chapter 1. The Racer's Keepsakes. The dust-covered Toyota Celica lay dormant in Jean Hackman's Santa Fe garage, silent as an aging witness waiting for its story to be told. Amidst the harsh Highland sunlight, the car had lost its former luster, but the layers of dust couldn't hide the lingering breath of speed etched into every metal panel. It was found after Hackman passed away, during a family decision to organize his belongings. The garage door creaked open after years of being locked. No one thought that behind that iron door lay a museum of memories of a semi-professional racer who had mastered the death-defying turns at the 24 Hours of Daytona in 1983. The Celica was more than just a car. It was a forbidden love affair between Hackman and the world of speed, a love he never flaunted under the Hollywood lights. On the windshield, the 1983 Daytona participant decal still clung, its edges worn, but the crimson letters still prominent. A small sticker, but it contained the entire soul of Hackman on the racetrack that year. Inside the car, the cockpit was almost untouched, as if Hackman had just stepped out for a smoke and would return at any moment. On the passenger seat, a pair of worn leather racing gloves, the fingers wrinkled, but the fingertips still stained with traces of motor oil. A racing certificate printed with the words Jean Hackman, official participant, 24 Hours of Daytona, the signature blurred by time but still recognizable as the bold strokes of an unyielding man. Flipped over, tucked beside the gear stick, was a small photo. Jean Hackman, wearing a white racing suit, standing beside the Toyota racing team, a crooked smile full of dust and sunburn. It wasn't the smile of an A-list Hollywood star. It was the smile of a racer ready to burn the asphalt, regardless of fame or status. Many Jean Hackman fans could recite every role, every award, every sharp interview he had given. But the love affair between Jean Hackman and speed, which he kept hidden for decades, was a completely foreign chapter to even the most ardent fans. No one really knew why Hackman was so passionate about racing. Some said it was his way of escaping Hollywood, the smoke-filled parties and cold handshakes. But others believed that it was on the turns at Daytona that Hackman truly lived, not as a star, but as a raw human being with speed and fear close at hand. In his days in Santa Fe, he rarely mentioned that past. The Celica sat still, unstarted, no engine roaring. But whenever Hackman entered the garage, leaning against the cold car body, his eyes gleamed with a strange light, as if the old races had never really ended in his mind. After Hackman passed away, American media simultaneously reported this unexpected discovery, causing a sensation no less than any Hollywood scandal. Jean Hackman, the hidden racer of Hollywood, large headlines ran on the front pages of numerous newspapers, painting a completely new portrait of a screen legend. But amidst the clamor outside, the Celica stood there, a loyal keeper of secrets, a place hiding unfinished races, turns Hackman didn't get to conquer, and the engine roars that only he could hear every night when the city of Santa Fe fell silent. Because for Jean Hackman, cinema might have been his life, but the racetrack was his soul. Chapter 2. Hollywood Relics in the Glove Box. The car door swung open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit space that contained a silent chapter of Hollywood history. Jean Hackman's personal car, though not outwardly flashy, was filled in every corner with irreplaceable pieces of his career and life. Behind the wheel of that car, Hackman was not just a movie star, he was the soul of breathtaking chases, where every turn not only determined the character's survival, but also gambled Hackman's reputation, and standing in a Hollywood full of those willing to push each other off the road. The glove compartment, usually reserved for insurance papers or old sunglasses, was where Hackman kept some of his most glorious memories. When Santa Fe police inspected the car after Hackman's passing, no one expected they would find one of the most precious artifacts in American film history, the original script of The French Connection, 1971, a film that not only brought home the prestigious Oscar statuette, but also forever etched Hackman's name into the list of the greatest actors of all time. But what made this document truly priceless was not just its authenticity. Interspersed between the yellowed pages were Hackman's own scribbled handwritten notes, leaving his personal mark on every chase scene. The shaky, hastily written lines in blue ink revealed Hackman's true thoughts on scenes that seemed perfect. In one section, Hackman wrote, "Too tight at third corner. Loosen grip, but keep full throttle." Just a small note, but it encapsulated Hackman's entire acting philosophy, to live the speed, to make the character his own flesh and blood rather than just a role on paper. Beneath the script, like a protective layer for the stacked memories, was a handwritten letter from director William Friedkin, who had bet his entire career on giving the role of Jimmy Popeye Doyle to Hackman, despite countless doubts from critics at the time. The letter was faded, the handwriting decisive, but with a hint of regret, as if Friedkin knew that after that film he would never find another crazy driver like Hackman. To Gene, the bravest driver in Hollywood, who never knew fear and made every engine roar like it belonged to him. Without flowery praise, those words captured the essence of Gene Hackman, an actor who wasn't afraid to get mud on his wheels, wasn't afraid to push the car against the wall, and didn't need a stunt double to protect himself. In a rare 1993 interview, Hackman mentioned this letter, but he just smiled when asked why he had kept it for decades. "Because it's not about acting," Hackman said. "It's about the road, the grit, the smell of burnt rubber. That's the real award." Critics might forever see Hackman through the lens of awards and accolades, but it was the old scraps of paper in the glove compartment that truly told the story of a Gene Hackman no one knew. A man who saw every chase scene as a life-or-death struggle, not to win a role, but to prove that the blood of a racer still flowed in the veins of a film legend. After these mementos were discovered, American media exploded with nostalgic articles about the golden age of authentic chase scenes, an era where Gene Hackman was the soul. But despite the clamor outside, the letter and script remained still, closed in the glove compartment, as if Hackman had never really left, but was just waiting to return to the driver's seat, where he and the speed machines could continue the untold stories. Because for Gene Hackman, cinema was just a part. The racetrack and the burning turns were where he truly belonged. Chapter 3. The Medical Mystery Log. When the driver's side door was pulled open, a dim light from outside fell upon the worn leather surface of the glove compartment near the door panel. Santa Fe police at the time didn't expect to find ordinary personal items like leather gloves or the Ray-Ban sunglasses Hackman often wore, but rather a thin folder, its corners slightly bent, the paper yellowed as if it had been turned many times. The handwritten title on the cover read simply, "Pacemaker Log." As a man who had passed 7 decades of life, Gene Hackman was no stranger to regular checkups. But what startled both the investigation team and the medical community later was how meticulously Hackman tracked every activity of the seemingly inanimate device deep within his chest. Not doctors' reports, nor hospital records, the entire operating history of his pacemaker, his heart rhythm support device, was carefully recorded by Hackman himself, day by day, hour by hour after each checkup. The lines were consistent, written with a fountain pen slightly slanted to the left, not the free-spirited style of an artist, but the writing of someone obsessively cautious. Each page began with a specific date, followed by numbers, heart rate charts, electrical pulse frequency, and even Hackman's personal comments on his daily health. Once, in early February, just weeks before the fateful day of February 17th, Hackman wrote a short line that sent shivers down anyone's spine. "Slight irregular pulse detected. Review with private physician immediately." There was no panic in the words, just a cold note. but it contained indescribable unease. Hackman was not the type to easily succumb to worry or health paranoia. He had driven a car into a ditch while filming The French Connection, had piloted light aircraft through bad weather, and had survived a motorcycle accident in California. Yet, the lines in the medical mystery log showed a completely different side. A cautious, skeptical Jean Hackman who didn't fully trust the device implanted in his chest. For years, Hackman monitored his heart rate every morning, recording every tiny sign of slight tremors, inexplicable missed beats. Whenever he received results from his doctor, he noted them carefully, sometimes even attaching notes from his private physician, who later became unreachable. In a December entry from the previous year, Hackman wrote, "No anomalies detected, but patient remains unconvinced." The phrase, "patient remains unconvinced," was like a small declaration, yet it contained Hackman's persistent anxiety about the pacemaker, something that was tied to his life, but never gave him a sense of true security. After these records were leaked to the American press, a series of theories were put forward. Had Hackman discovered something abnormal in the device's design or operation? Had he suspected the doctors or the pacemaker manufacturer? Sources claimed that Hackman had joined a small group of high-profile cardiac patients where they shared information about mysterious technical glitches in early pacemaker models. Although there was no evidence strong enough to accuse or conclude, Hackman's obsession with every heartbeat, every number on the monitor, turned the story of his pacemaker into an unsolved medical mystery. It was no longer just a medical device. To Hackman, it was like a tiny Pandora's box lodged deep in his chest, ready to open at any moment to swallow any fragile hope of a peaceful old age. And finally, when the car was sealed, the thin folder remained in the door pocket, a reminder that even legends have fears they never dare to speak. Chapter 4. The Silent Soundtrack. There are moments in life that last only a few seconds, but are etched like a long scratch on glass. The moment the CD player in Jean Hackman's car stopped on a silent winter morning in Santa Fe was such a scratch. The car was found parked near the trailhead leading to the path around the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. This was the route Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, had taken every morning for nearly 30 years. Santa Fe didn't have busy highways or noisy car horns. There was only the early morning sun casting a thin golden layer on the mountainside, cacti standing still like stone statues, and the wind gently blowing through the old pine trees. On the car's dashboard, the CD player was still on, but instead of continuing to play the familiar gentle melodies, the small screen displayed a cold line. Track 9, paused. Track 9, it was later determined, was Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece Betsy had performed at her first concert as a concert pianist. That day, Hackman sat in the front row among the elegant crowd in a small California theater, quietly watching the woman of his life place her hands on the keys. He once said in a rare interview, "That night, the music was the only thing I could hear. Everything else was just noise." No one knew why the playlist stopped midway. The CD was not scratched. The sound system was perfect. But the word paused was like an invisible knife cutting the flow of emotions, leaving a heavy silence, as if Hackman himself, or perhaps someone else, had intentionally prevented the music from playing to the end. Santa Fe New Mexican, the local newspaper that published Hackman's obituary, mentioned this detail in a short passage, but its weight was only truly felt when other pieces were added to the big picture. A speed-loving Jean Hackman, a Hackman who meticulously recorded every heartbeat, and a Hackman, a man who drove his wife to see the mountains every morning for 3 decades, just to listen to the melodies that had brought them together. The playlist was more than just songs. It was the memories Hackman kept from his own life. The days Betsy stood under the stage lights, the afternoons they sat together by the window watching the sunset, the aimless drives on the dusty roads of New Mexico. Betsy had stopped her career to be by his side, but her music never left. It was still there, weaving through the classical melodies in the playlist Hackman listened to for decades. Santa Fe police later seized the CD system for inspection, but found no signs of tampering or malfunction. Betsy Arakawa, when asked, simply shook her head silently. Some things don't need explanation because their essence is an answer. Perhaps Hackman himself, on a quiet morning, had unconsciously pressed the pause button right at the most beautiful part of Clair de Lune, the transition from the low G note to the dreamy chord progression, like morning mist. Stopped, not because the music had a problem, but because he needed to keep it there, at that moment. A second before everything changed, a second before silence enveloped. The music was not finished because his life was not completely over. The story of the car, the unfinished music, the man who lived every moment of his life to the fullest, all blended together, creating another silent melody. A melody no one heard, but everyone felt. Hackman's playlist remains in the hands of Santa Fe police, a final testament to sun-drenched mornings, classical melodies, and a love affair that lasted nearly 30 years, stopped at the most beautiful moment. Chapter 5. Dog Hair and Desert Dust. The car, a symbol of leisurely mornings around the Santa Fe mountains, now became a somber piece in the final picture of Jean Hackman. The first thing that caught the investigators' attention was the dog hair everywhere, on the leather seats, the floor mats, even the small gaps between the dashboard and the gear stick. They were unmistakable, the long, light-colored hairs of the old dog Jean and Betsy, affectionately called Charlie. Charlie had been an integral part of the couple's life for nearly 15 years. Santa Fe residents were familiar with the sight of Jean Hackman, his silver hair tousled under the Highland sun, holding Charlie's leash along the trail behind their house. Charlie liked to run ahead, occasionally turning back to look at his owner as if to make sure Jean was still following. But on February 26th, when police found Hackman and Betsy in their silent home, Charlie was found in the bathroom, lying motionless on an old towel without a bark or sign of resistance. The odd thing was, Charlie rarely went in the car. Throughout his life, Charlie only got into the car when Jean lifted him onto the back seat, and that was usually for camping trips, something they hadn't done in years. But Charlie's hair was found all over the car, mixed with something even stranger, desert dust. The Santa Fe region is known for its red dust storms, but the dust found inside Hackman's car was not the same as the dust around his house. Forensic analysis later determined that it was sediment dust typical of the southwest desert region of Santa Fe, where there were narrow dirt roads known only to locals and not on the Hackman's usual routes. This discovery led to an unanswered question. Who drove the car out of the neighborhood to a strange land and then returned in silence? The first and most conceivable theory was that Jean or Betsy had driven somewhere before February 17th, the day Hackman's pacemaker recorded its last abnormal signal. But if so, why didn't they leave any trace of the trip? No one in the neighborhood saw them leave. No stores, gas stations, or traffic cameras recorded the car on major roads. The second theory, more chilling, but fitting the inexplicable gap. Perhaps a third party had used the car. That person might have driven it through the dusty trails, taking Charlie or his body before returning the car, giving it a cursory clean, and disappearing. This detail further fueled public interest after the Santa Fe Sheriff's press conference. In a small, crowded press room, a close-up photo of the dust on the floor mat was projected onto a large screen. Dog hair, desert dust, a paused playlist. Disparate fragments of a larger mystery, a final trip never mentioned. Where did Hackman go? Who did he meet? And what did he do in his final days? All were still covered by that desert dust. Only Charlie, if he could still tell, would know what really happened on the silent roads of Santa Fe. Chapter 6. The Unfinished Farewell. Among the personal items in the trunk, a few old screwdrivers, a faded first aid kit, and a crumpled wool blanket, investigators found a small notebook. Not a luxurious hardcover, not an elaborate lock, just a soft leather notebook, its edges worn, the paper yellowed as if it had traveled with Hackman through too many sunny seasons in Santa Fe. According to family disclosures, Hackman had a habit of keeping a sporadic diary in his later years as his health began to decline. This notebook was not for work or scripts, but a private journal. where he recorded personal thoughts, reflections on life after leaving Hollywood and choosing Santa Fe as his retreat. Santa Fe investigators described a small notebook, soft leather cover, worn as if it had been carried for many years. The handwriting inside was confirmed by the family to be Jean Hackman's. The last entry in the notebook, written on February 16th, exactly 1 day before his pacemaker recorded the first abnormal signs, was partially released in the investigation report. If this is the final stretch, I have no regrets. I only regret that Betsy will have to go alone. This entry quickly became a focal point on film forums and social media. It was seen as a short but haunting farewell, no different from the classic lines in Hackman's films. Hackman's family confirmed that. The notebook was indeed his personal possession. The contents were entirely written by Jean Hackman. This was not a formal will, but just an emotional note. In a short interview with the Santa Fe New Mexican, a close friend of Hackman recounted that the actor had long had a bad feeling about his health. After a general health check, doctors advised him to consider replacing his pacemaker as the old device had been in use for 15 years, exceeding the recommended average lifespan. However, Hackman declined, fearing the surgery would affect his overall health. Newspapers also quoted a close source, saying that Hackman had confided in close friends. If that day comes, I want it to come gently. No hospitals, no ventilators, no one to witness. This statement, coupled with the notebook entry, led to many theories after his death, that Hackman had a clear premonition of his death. GPS data from the car, released by the Santa Fe sheriff, showed that on the afternoon of February 16th, immediately after writing the last entry in the notebook, Hackman drove out. The car traveled along a mountain road about 7 miles from his home. This was a route Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, often took each morning to watch the sunrise and take commemorative photos. According to records from the Santa Fe New Mexican, it was on this road that Hackman once joked with Betsy on their wedding anniversary, "If I can't drive home myself, leave me here. It's more beautiful than any cemetery I've ever seen." The car stopped for about 17 minutes. This was the actual data from the investigation report, but no cameras recorded what Hackman did during that time. Some investigative journalists suggested that it was likely that Hackman sat in the car, wrote the last lines in his notebook, before returning home. The old car was not a vehicle, but a coffin for the bloodiest secrets Jean Hackman had ever concealed. Now, those in the shadows are the ones counting down the hours until those secrets are exposed. The old car sat quietly in the garage, covered in the dust of time and unspoken secrets. It was not just a car, but a silent witness, a repository of memories and truths that Jean Hackman had painstakingly hidden throughout his life. In the trunk, there were not only personal belongings, but also evidence, documents, recordings, photographs, all revealing the dark corners of Hollywood, secrets that, if exposed, would shake an entire empire. Jean Hackman, the man with the piercing gaze and enigmatic smile, was not just a talented actor, but also a keen observer, a shrewd collector of information. He had witnessed too much, knew too much, and now those secrets lay dormant in the old car, waiting to be unleashed. Those in the shadows, those who had exploited, deceived, and even harmed others, were now trembling. They knew that the old car was not just an inanimate object, but a ticking time bomb, capable of exploding at any moment, exposing their crimes. They were counting down the hours, the minutes, hoping that those secrets would be forever buried. But the truth cannot be hidden forever. It will find a way out, no matter how many hardships and challenges it faces. The old car, with its bloody secrets, would become a symbol, a warning, a reminder that no one can escape the judgment of justice. These secrets, once exposed, would not only shake Hollywood, but also change how we perceive those we once admired. The car held not just secrets, but the potential for a reckoning, a final act in Hackman's own way.